Locally Sourced, I'm Armanda Familetti. Tonight's guest has a long history in public service. First as a housing advocate, then as a 4-term Westchester legislator, and most recently working in the governor's administration. And now he's running for state senate in the 40th District. Welcome, Pete Harckham.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. So, Pete, why are you running?
I'm as outraged as everybody else about the extremism coming out of Washington and Albany. Economic warfare has been declared on the state of New York with the loss of deduction for much of our state and local property taxes. You have climate change deniers who are now cutting regulations to protect our air and water. In fact, Harvard did a study and said that if these cuts go into effect, 80,000 more people a decade will die because of lung-related illnesses. Ideologues are cutting the Affordable Care Act, so rates for New Yorkers are going up 24%, and coverage is being lost by many New Yorkers. So I'm as outraged by that as other folks. But on the other hand, in Albany, we have gridlock, and we have a New York State Senate Republican majority that's blocking things like the blocking things like the red flag bill, the Child Victims Act, and the current senator is proposing a voter ID law, which is really something out of the Jim Crow South. So I'm running to fight for Hudson Valley values, and I'm running to fight against Trump values. Okay.
So you're running in the 40th District. I think we have a sign of what the 40th District looks like. So if we can get that slide up in a minute. So you mentioned a lot of things that are happening at the national level. Is it possible that, oh, there it is. Okay, so I'll get to that question in a minute. So tell me about the 40th District of New York.
The 40th District is an interesting district because it ranges from semi-urban communities like Sleepy Hollow and Mount Kisco to outright agricultural. And it's really the former legislative district that I used to represent is kind of a microcosm of that. And further, it's a mixed district politically. It's about a third. So the non-aligned voters who are not aligned with either major party really have a lot to say about who will be the next senator. And what the non-aligned voters want is bipartisanship. They want people to get along. They want people to work across the aisle. And when I was the majority leader of the Westchester County Board of Legislators, I did just that. And probably about 90% of things we passed unanimously because we took the time to work things across party lines.
So let me look at that slide again. I look at that slide and I see a kitten jumping into the Hudson, right? Do you see that?
Sure.
So why?
The Rorschach test.
Yeah, why is that? Why does it look like that? Why isn't it a little more uniform? That's a very strange-looking formation. What would you call that?
That's called gerrymandering.
Gerrymandering.
What we need to do is we need to get back to neutral districts. If you notice, the town of Bedford was carved out of that, and that was done to give what they thought would be an advantage to Cohen over Latimer, because Bedford used to be thought of as a Republican town. What the Republicans didn't know when they drew that line was that Bedford is a Democratic stronghold now. I spent years working with the Bedford Democratic Committee when I used to live there to build capacity, and now that's a Democratic town, which George Latimer and Shelley Mayer carried quite easily.
Okay, so we're coming up to the census in 2020, right? And it's after the census that districts are carved out by the state assembly and the Senate?
Yep, it's done by the legislature.
Okay, so what would be your proposal if you were elected and you were in the Senate to change gerrymandering and make the districts more nonpartisan?
I can tell you what I did when I was in the legislature and we had to do redistricting. I made my district more difficult. We added more Republicans. So it was the opposite of gerrymandering because you want some kind of contiguous sanity instead of breaking up towns or you have part of this or part of that. So I think you need to look at the voter composition, the demographics, and you also have to look at keeping towns whole.
What about an independent commission? Take
Well,
it out of the hands of the legislators.
They should be making their recommendations. I know the League of Women Voters does a good job with that. They're strong advocates for impartial districts. It's really up to the leadership of both houses to take that up and look at it seriously.
So would you think that's a good idea?
Oh,
I mean, a lot of
absolutely.
other states have gone with independent redistricting commissions.
No, and
Take it out of the hand of the politicians.
And it's important because then the elected officials are not playing to the fringes of their parties. They're not worried about primaries. They're worried more about a general election. So
tell me, what is the most pressing issues, or what are the most pressing issues in the 40th District right now and in the future?
Well, the number one is always taxes, high property taxes, which will now be exacerbated by the Congress's action with the tax bill, eliminating a lot of the deduction for state and local taxes. So not only will people be paying more in taxes, the value of their homes will be coming down, and home ownership has always been central to the fabric of the economies of Westchester, Putnam, and Dutchess. Another issue that is we see all too often now are NYSEG's poor response to storms, and also their refusal to truly build a resilient grid with hardened poles, hardened substations, elevated from flooding. This is becoming the norm in the rest of the country, and it seems every time we have a storm here, NYSEG says, oh, we lost 1,100 poles, we had to rebuild our whole system, and they rebuild the antiquated system that they've always had.
So let me interrupt you for a
Yeah.
minute. Can you give me the solutions to these problems as well?
A-
So going back to
absolutely.
the taxes, what would you do if you were elected to help me with my incredibly high property and school taxes?
Well, we need to get involved with shared services. I think we need, as a state, to take a hard look at how we fund education, so we get away from this insistence on property taxes, which is a regressive tax. You know, people on fixed incomes and seniors, their incomes are not going up at the pace of taxes. I think the tax cap has been effective, so I think we need to keep the tax cap, and we need to look more thoroughly at shared services. When I was a legislator, we merged the Mount Kisco Police Department with the Westchester County Police Department. We saved the taxpayers of Mount Kisco $800,000 a year, which is significant ongoing. And there was no increased cost to the county. Plus, because we had existing command and control at the county level, the officer who was the supervisor back in the office could be out on the street, and you had more police protection. So it was a win-win for everybody, and those are the types of things
What
we
about
need
school
to think
districts?
about.
I mean, just thinking about Putnam County, now the 40th District encompasses a lot more than us, but there are under 100,000 people living in Putnam County. So you imagine, I think there's only 14,000 students. There are 6 school districts. Each school district has a superintendent, highly paid, in the $200,000+ range. And then they have a whole staff.
Right, it's the administration that goes with that,
Right.
plus the added vehicles, the maintenance vehicles, all
It's
those
very
things.
redundant. Don't you think that we could have 1 or 2 school districts? I mean, that's how I look at it. What would you think about consolidating districts?
That is part of the solution. But with any of this stuff, New York is a home rule state, and New York residents take that very seriously. But if people want meaningful tax relief, or at least to forestall increases, they have to rethink how they're governed. You know, in Westchester, do you need 41 police departments? Probably not. So who's going to be willing to merge their police department? Can we have regional courts instead of every municipality having their own court? If you look at those courts, they're in session 1 at most 2 nights a week. So why can't we have one staff and one central court administering 3 or 4 towns? So those are the kind of things that we're going to have to do if we really want to make a dent in the tax
So you would
situation.
push for those kind of efforts as state senator. Would you be able to make a difference as state senator? Would
Oh,
your
absolutely.
authority reach as far as saying Come on, Putnam County. You don't need six school districts.
You have to lead from the front. You can't sit back and expect that people will do things on their own. So if you want to affect change, you have to be there. You have to be on the front lines, and you have to use the bully pulpit. Or you have to use your knowledge of where there's money, which there is in the state budget, to help people consolidate. Another issue that I feel very strongly about is if you look at any of the downtown main streets in any of the communities in the Hudson Valley, there are empty storefronts. Why are there empty storefronts? Well, because family businesses can't compete with the big box store chains and with the online retailers. So we need to focus like a laser on economic redevelopment of our downtowns. We need to make them more attractive for foot traffic. So in some cases, that's bringing in restaurants. There are a lot of municipalities that don't have sewer systems. So restaurants can't get water permits from the health departments because their septic systems can't accommodate the flow for washing dishes. So we need to bring infrastructure in. In other cases, it may be, how do we improve the streetscape, the lighting, the sidewalk, to make it a more appealing experience? Can we build a plaza where people can gather? The roads, we need to reinvest in repaving many of our roads or widening some of them to attract people into our downtowns the way they did many years ago.
So you mentioned that there's money out there and you have to know how to get it.
Yeah.
And one of the things you did when you worked in the governor's administration was manage block grants. Now, I think a lot of people like me don't understand where this money is, how the municipalities get it, and what our local representatives, our senators and assemblymen can do to help us get that money so we can get grants to revitalize our downtown and other things that you mentioned that we need. Tell us about that.
Sure. It used to be very complex because every agency in the state government had a different application process, and you had to know where to look. The governor wisely created what's called the Consolidated Funding Application. And that's where you can go, and if you want to apply for housing money, if you want to apply for environmental money, it's all in the same place. So as a senator, what you need to do is work with each municipality on what their needs are, understand what they're trying to accomplish, and then you can show them where in the application that money is. For instance, when I worked for the Office of Community Renewal doing community development block grants, the state runs that program for municipalities smaller than 50,000 people, and you can do housing, you can do infrastructure, you can do handicap accessibility.
Is that for towns under 50,000?
Yeah,
okay.
and counties under 250,000.
Oh, well, we qualify for that.
Yeah, and then if they're larger than that, they generally operate their own block grant program because it really comes through the federal government and the state as a pass-through. But I served on as a liaison for the Hudson Valley Regional Economic Development Council, and there's also great benefit for municipalities to go to the council and explain to them what their priorities are, what their economic redevelopment needs are. And again, it takes a senator to get engaged in the process and not sit back and say, well, I approve the budget, that's it. You really need to work one-on-one with your municipalities, and that's what I did as a legislator. It didn't matter whether the supervisor or the mayor was a Republican or a Democrat. Once we're elected, we serve everybody and we work together.
Right. So you have experience doing that.
Absolutely.
Which is great. That would be great for Putnam County. Currently, every once in a while, I should say, I get a postcard from my senator in the 40th District and touting, I got this money for this, I got that money for that, I increased this for that, and I think, how did he do that? How did I, speaking as the senator or assemblyman, do that? So can you explain? There's no explanation on these postcards about where this money came from, how the state senator got it, why he's taking credit for pushing it into our economy. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, why they're taking credit for it is always the mystery, because a lot of times these are just allocations that are in the general operating budget that happen to scale out. So, for instance,
the state's general operating
budget?
budget?
Yeah, for instance, The current senator is talking about getting, I think it was $300,000 for eutrophication treatment for a lake in Putnam County. That was part of a DEC program to do that. Now, when I was in the legislature, and this is a huge issue in the watershed in Westchester, Putnam, and Dutchess, is dealing with phosphorus reduction. DEC has mandated that, and for all the municipalities, the first phase was $500 million. So it's very, very expensive, and I worked with those municipalities very closely and was able to bring back $30 million to those municipalities for phosphorus reduction and for sewer projects in two communities.
So is it just there's the money's there? Is it a matter of just asking for it or showing that our communities deserve that piece of the pie?
In some cases it is. As in Westchester County, that was New York City DEP money, and the Westchester County Board of Legislators, we were the trustees of that money. But there were certain criteria and thresholds communities had to reach. You just couldn't give somebody that money. So in some cases, yes, an elected official can go to a department where they have discretionary funds and say we have X, Y, and Z challenge. But most of the funding is grant oriented. It's a competitive application process. I don't think we want to go back to the old days of member items with those kind of slush funds. So you do have to know what departments have what, and that's where the consolidated funding application comes in, the regional economic development councils, and working closely in consort with that.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds to me like you're saying that's the system, and you have to be savvy and know how to get those funds, and you're savvy and you know how to get those funds.
You have to
and so
be
If
experienced.
you're working for the District 40, then you're going to be able to do that, right?
Absolutely.
Do you think you could increase the amount of funding, federal, state, and different departments?
It takes a focus, and it needs to be the appropriate funding. So I did that as a Westchester County legislator. I did it in the Office of Community Renewal. I also served as the Director of Intergovernmental Affairs for the Tappan Zee Bridge Replacement Project, and we had a community benefits fund, things like insulated windows and doors to prevent noise irritation from folks living around the construction site, emergency first responder equipment to the municipalities that are charged with responding to the bridge. So the state can be a resource, but it's, you don't want to misrepresent and say the cash will be flowing just because somebody's elected.
I appreciate that. You're honest.
It's a competitive
and
process.
Realistic. I appreciate that.
What it really takes is elbow grease and focus.
So we have about 10 minutes left, and I just want to remind people to vote, right? Elections are won and lost at local elections, state elections, by hundreds of votes. And so it's important to be registered. We have a slide that explains a great website to go to. There it is if you need to register to vote. If you want to change your party enrollment, you mentioned that a lot of people are really angry at what's happening at the national level. If you want to update your home address, if you move from one part of District 40 to another, it's important to make sure that you do that. The election schedule, if you're going to be away for voting, the absentee ballots, polling places, it's electionsnewyork.gov. And lots of other interesting information about rules and regulations in terms of elections.
Sure, absolutely.
So let's talk about a little bit about one of the issues that upsets me. Is that too frequently we're hearing about corruption in Albany. Both Republicans and Democrats, state politicians, their aides, they have been charged in crimes and convicted. And then there are many other terrible allegations about abuse to women and sexual harassment. There's something called the Joint Commission on Public Ethics that's supposed to be protecting the public and the taxpayers from corruption in Albany. What is going on in Albany, and how can it be fixed?
It's a shame, because when that happens, it stains everybody in public service. And I know really good people in both parties who are in government for the right reasons. It's public service, it's an honor, and it's a privilege to do, and those who abuse it tarnish all of us. So we need to, I think we need to rein in some of the unlimited funding, the LLC loophole for one.
What is that? Can you explain that a little bit?
It allows LLCs, limited liability companies, can give it a much higher level than individuals, but it's very
campaign donations.
Right, but it's very easy for you as an individual to set up an LLC. So you yourself can be an LLC.
And people are doing that?
Yeah, that happens.
So these are wealthy people who want to maybe influence the politicians with a donation?
We need to level the playing field a bit. That's one of the ways to do it. Give the commission more teeth. Give the Attorney General more leeway into looking into these things. The public funds should not be used to settle sexual harassment claims. That should fall to the individual who's guilty.
Is that still going on? I thought they did something about that.
But, it goes to the mentality. If you look at the Republicans in the Senate have blocked the Child Victims Act, which would give adults who were abused as children an extended period of time to take their abuser to court to hold them accountable. And they've been blocking that.
Why are they blocking? It seems like a good idea. Why would they?
You have to ask them. It's they're putting politics before people. And if you look at what they passed instead as their alternative, it was a publicly funded compensation pool to victims, but without holding the abusers accountable and the institutions that enabled them. So it's the same mentality. Oh, well, let's just use public money to cover this up. No, you hold the individual accountable. We should all be held to a high standard, and we should all be held accountable.
Plus, it's taxpayer money.
It is.
Right? I don't want my taxpayer money going to pay some kind of harassment settlement for bad behavior by a politician.
Exactly.
And that, it's really disturbing for we, civilians to see that. So,
absolutely.
You said give the commission more teeth. They don't have enough teeth. Is that the problem? They're not rooting out this corruption?
I think the criminal charges need to go through the Attorney General's office, but whether it's a question of budgeting or staffing at that level, they should be doing the research and making the recommendations. And if they're criminal referrals, they should be made. But there are plenty of regulations in place in terms of campaign finance and public disclosure and all those kind of things. And what we need to do is enforce those rules and regulations, and we need to have stricter limits on campaign donations.
Yeah, I went to the website of the Commission on Ethics and Corruption, whatever it's called, and it's. I noticed there are a lot of people on that commission. They've been appointed by the governor. They've been appointed by Mr. Flanagan. Is he the Speaker of the Senate? Or
he's the leader of the Senate.
Leader of the Senate. So it's a bipartisan committee. And it says we're here to protect the taxpayer, this and that. And so, what would you do specifically to help with that issue?
You need to see if it's a staffing level. You can have all the commissions in the world, but if they don't have the staff to actually do the research that they're charged with doing, that's an important shortcoming that needs to be addressed.
Okay. So they have a lot of chiefs and no Indians over at the commission.
It could be, or they could have a great staff who's working very hard.
Okay.
And that's one of the things we'll look into. But everyone in public service needs to be held to a high standard. But people should also know that there are a lot of good people on both sides of the aisle who really are in public service for the right reasons.
Okay. I just want to remind people that you're probably going to be in a primary.
It's possible, and we're happy to talk about my record and my experience, and that's what I'm running on.
And the primary is going to be September 13th. The general election is November 6th, so make sure that if you want to participate as do your good duty as a civic member of our community, please go and make sure you're registered to vote, and please make sure that you vote on both of those issues. We have about 2 minutes left. I know it goes fast, right? So you mentioned a little bit about the gridlock in, and can you quickly sort of explain what you would do to fix the gridlock if you were elected in
Sure.
Albany?
If I'm elected, that will automatically open the gridlock because it will switch the New York State Senate from a Republican-controlled Senate to a Democratic Senate, which we desperately need to fight the extremism that's coming out of Washington. Because right now we're fighting with one arm tied behind our back, where the governor and members of the legislature are trying to find workarounds for the loss of state and local tax deductions, and it's the Senate Republicans who filed a complaint with the IRS to block it. So that's outrageous that they're putting their political needs and desires before the people of the state of New York.
You know, that's how it looks to me. And I would say it's not just the Republicans who might be guilty of that a little bit. It seems like both sides are coming down on partisan issues, and who is the most willing to cross the aisle and talk to each other and get the people's work done?
It's true that we need to work in a bipartisan way, but the Republicans have blocked discussion. Let's have discussion on health care reform. Let's have discussion on education reform. Let's have discussion on a red flag bill. Let's have discussion on the Child's Victims Women's Reproductive Act. All of these things that are important, they don't have to agree with, but bring them to the floor. Put them to a vote. Let's have a discussion.
They don't even want to hear the discussion,
no,
you're saying.
No.
They won't take that step.
No, because they would rather protect the politics and the base that has shrunk for them. You know, remember when we had Rockefeller Republicans in New York? It was a reasonable, fiscally conservative, socially open group of Republicans. That group is gone now. And as John Boehner said the other day, there is no Republican Party anymore. There's the party of Trump. And so what we want to do in this campaign is start fighting for Hudson Valley values again, for the reasonable debate of issues.
Commonsensical.
Common sense, things like a red flag bill, where if a school administrator, a police officer, a counselor thinks that someone is at risk to themselves or someone else, they can petition a judge to temporarily, I stress, remove the firearms from that home until the situation is stabilized.
Right, yeah.
That's a common sense measure. It's passed in other states, and we should pass it here.
Oh, you know what? We're out of time. Pete Harckham, I want you to thank you so much for coming on, taking time, and it's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. You too.
And thanks to everyone who's watching tonight.